Okay, but he doesn't, he's not being taught on the side. Yeah, I have a white one. But some places that they would send me all. Yeah. Yeah. I know. Monica. I just have a blog. Waiting I have a blog. Anyway, it's yeah. Yep. At $100. Yeah. Yeah, we put it right 2 more words. It's a slow process.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our TESL WW, PD, and AGM for 2017. I was trying to remember, although I don't think I ever knew, how many years we've been meeting as TESL WW. Because it'd be nice to say, welcome to our 25th meeting, but I really don't know. So if anybody does know, I hope you tell me later on today. Maybe we can use that for next year. Okay, this morning we are really, we're blessed with beautiful weather outside, although this afternoon it might rain a little bit. But it's going to be more exciting indoors today because we have 4 workshops in the morning, 4 workshops this afternoon, and we have a very exciting keynote speaker today. So let me get on with introducing our theme and our speaker. I forgot my notes, hang on. So, as you're probably aware, our theme today is thinking critically, and we actually thought about, usually we say critical thinking, and we tend to associate that with academic ESL, but I think it is appropriate for all levels of ESL instruction because critical thinking really makes up a lot of what we teach to students, whether they're hearing it, reading it, or speaking it themselves. You might, for example, hear your students say to you, why do we have to do this assignment? Nobody's ever heard that, right? Or, how come government documents are so difficult to read? And as soon as you hear those questions, you know that your students are thinking critically. But thinking critically is more than just about being critical. It's about thinking with discrimination, okay? We know, for instance, that as Canadians, we are, you may not be aware of this, but we are really big consumers of reading material. We are some of the largest consumers of reading material in the world. Very often we read statistics and think that we're reading Canadian statistics, but we're looking at US statistics, and they are much lower, surprisingly. That being said, the students that come to Canada are also going to be exposed to a lot of the things that we read, and they're going to be expected to understand a lot of the things that we understand and take for granted. So when we're helping them think critically, we're also helping them move into their identity as users of the English language, and they're going to become higher discriminating consumers of English. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce our keynote this morning, Tyson Seabird. Tyson is the lead instructor of critical reading and writing at the University of Toronto, New College, and assistant director of academic international programs. He has also authored academic reading circles, and I see he's brought a few copies with him today. He holds an MA in Educational Technology and TESL from the University of Manchester. But most importantly, his main interests focus on two specific topics. So, reading collaboratively to improve comprehension of second language texts, and creating public spaces where teachers can explore their own identity, which is very important. He's now involved in IA TEFL, Teacher Development, which is a special interest group. So he'll tell you more about that himself. So could you please put your hands together and welcome Tyson.
Thank you very much, Denise. Now, just move myself over to my slide. So don't look for a second. Okay, so I'm extremely privileged to have been invited here today to speak to you, and I'm not going to talk too much about myself because Denise did a wonderful job of introducing me. I did throw in that last little bit about the ISFL Teacher Development Special Interest Group at the last minute, so Denise didn't really know what it was about. And I thought I would just mention very quickly that just like we have here, we have the TESL organizations here, run through TESL Ontario and TESL Canada. TEFL is what you might consider a much larger association that stands for the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language. It's sort of based in the UK, so I'm a little more heavily involved with that these days. However, I was quite heavily involved in our local organizations as well. I was the president of TESL Toronto for 3 years, a little while ago. But, you know, we all have to move on from time to time. So, that's all I really want to say about that. However, what you can see up here is an image, and if you look at it a little bit for a couple seconds, I just want you to think, what do you think about this image? Is there anything in the image that you feel as though looks familiar, or maybe looks unfamiliar? I just want you to think about that for just a quick second. So does anything look a little out of place? Or do you feel as though it's perfectly fine? Okay. So we're starting to see a little bit of some critical thinking happen, perhaps. This guy is the sort of weird part of this image, right? If you look at the whole image, you can see Snow White, you see the dwarf's house, you see all the little animals, and most of us probably just kind of quickly accept that this image is pretty much acceptable. But when you dig a little bit deeper into this text and you look at it from a more critical perspective, you can start to notice this little inconsistency with this man sleeping there. And you may start to have some questions that raise in your mind. A, who is he? I don't remember a man sleeping in Snow White's bed or the dwarf's bed. B, how did he get there? Why is Snow White not seeming to care? Why is she leaving him in this bed? Right? This is just a quick example of how we need to be a bit more cognizant of what's happening and what we're exposed to. And that leads me to what I'm going to be talking today about, which is critical readers, really in the misinformation age these days. I'll return to this image a little bit later so that you can have a little bit more time to think about who that guy is. Now, when I conceived of this talk back in October or early November, the idea of fake news was something that was really just starting to come about, right? I'm sure we've all heard of the term fake news before, but it really wasn't so forefront, I think, as it is since then. And we can see that since then, there have been a number of articles that have come out including the word fake news. And of course, this is something that has been revolving kind of around Trump, right? But it's not something that is totally brand new, and it's not something that you probably haven't heard of before. Another term that has been coming up lately is this one. You can see alternative facts, something that came out with Kelly Conway. You might remember that time where Trump, during his inauguration, news suggested that it was a poorly attended inauguration in comparison to Obama. And Kelly Conway came on and she suggested that, no, we heard that it was one of the most attended ones in history. And she suggested that that was related to some alternative facts that she had gotten. And I think what's kind of interesting is this term has blossomed a little bit insofar as now there's a game that I found online where you can buy this game about alternative facts, and more or less you read the card and you try to decide whether it's something that's based on truth or whether it's something that's based on alternative facts. And then finally, a third term that has come to the forefront with regard to reading and critical reading is this. And you might notice that the word I'm focusing on here is post-truth. And post-truth is suggesting that we're living in a time where the truth isn't necessarily the most important thing. We're living in a post-truth time, where we can take ideas and manipulate them. And it has become so prominent in our culture lately that Oxford English Dictionary actually named post-truth as the word of the year last year. So I think with these things in mind, we have to keep really cognizant of how our learners are being exposed to these different types of readings. When they look at the news, when they look at magazines, even when they look at course books and things that we expose them to in the classroom. And as I said, since I started creating this talk, there has been many articles that are surrounding all of these terms. And I really didn't expect it to happen. And luckily for me, once Trump was elected, we got lots and lots and lots of material that we can start using with our learners in our classroom. Now you might think, is this something that is related mostly to the US? Well, I'm going to suggest that no, it's not. Right? Even the National Observer and several other newspapers that I've looked at more recently suggest that Canada, too, is a country so close to the US that we may be vulnerable to this type of fake news, and this type of alternative facts, and these types of post-truths. So we need to be very aware of this when we're bringing materials into the class, and consider how we can get our learners to really navigate through all of this type of fake information, and try to figure out how to be a critical reader so that it not only affects them in a more positive light, but it also helps them build tools to be able to navigate society that they're in now. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, in particular, are four main questions. One, is this fake news a new phenomenon? Is it something that is just happening these days? Do we have to build skills that are new? Do we have to help our learners with new skills that we didn't have to before? Another question I want to address is why? Why are people susceptible to believing this fake news? What is it about it? What are the characteristics that create these alternative facts and make things quite believable? And how can we use those things in our own understanding of how we're affected by it in order to teach our students how not to be affected by it as well? I want to look at the impact that this type of perception, this type of news and these types of articles have on our learners. And really, how can we combat that? And as I said, I'm going to end the talk with a few practical suggestions, things that we can use in our classroom in order to help our learners navigate through all of these different types of readings that they're being exposed to. So, question number one, is this a new phenomenon? The answer is no. It is not a new phenomenon. We've been exposed to this our entire life, and long before you were born, people generations before us were exposed to these types of things as well. And you might not immediately think, okay, how was that possible, right? It seems to be something that's really just happening a lot these days. But in fact, if you think of propaganda, right? I could go back way, way, way back in history, but I'm not going to. I think it would take a long time to go too far back in history. But I'm going to show you a little bit of propaganda, and usually that is started by world events, right? When something big happens in the world, an authority tries to come in and tries to shape the way we think through different types of media. But not only propaganda, marketing is also another way in which sales and retail these days try to shape how we think and what we believe and how we buy and purchase things. And then there's this last bit, education, right? Obviously, we need to think as teachers how we're educating our students. Are we propagandizing in any way? Are we putting our beliefs into our learners? Are we shaping how they feel about Canada, either in a positive or negative fashion? And when I put education in quotation marks, really one thing I'm suggesting is that, not in our case, because of course we're teachers and we're wonderful, and you know, we're trying to give our learners the best experience in the classroom that's possible. But authority, governments, different types of organizations, they all try to manipulate how we think and educate us to believe one thing or another. So let's go back a little bit in history. I'm not going to go too far back. But I told you that a lot of propaganda begins with world events and things that happened. In this case, what I'm trying to show you is that a particular authority usually tries, or often tries, to make a connection to how we believe about certain cultures. And it tries to shape our opinions about how we believe about those cultures. So what I did was I went back and I found, I went down kind of a rabbit hole actually on the internet, looking at different types of propaganda photos and images. And these are real ones from World War I and World War II. And what you can see in this particular one is a shaping of how we're supposed to think about Germany at the time. In this case, what we can see is when you ride alone, you ride with Hitler, right? What they're trying to show is that you need to save energy, you need to, carpool with different people, and if you don't, you're being very much like the Germans. And of course, that's a negative perception at that time. Another propaganda poster from around the same time period was this one, where they're trying to get people to enlist into the army. Right? They're suggesting that, okay, you know what? If you didn't really do anything to help us last year, now's your opportunity. It's not too late. You can join the army, you can fight, and you can be part of the national effort. Now, it isn't just relegated to Germany, of course. This chap was appearing on a propaganda photo as well. And we can see here that the government that created this is trying to demonize the Japanese. They're trying to suggest, really, if you waste food, if you waste paper, if you waste different types of things while the war is going on, you're making this culture very happy because they're the enemy. And then I'll just end off quickly with this one as well. Now, it's a lot of reading there, so I don't expect you to really sit there and read it. It's not totally the point. But what I'm trying to show is that throughout the propagandizing that happened during the World Wars, that is trying to shape the way people in the United States, in Canada, in Britain, and so on felt about those countries. In each case, they were trying to demonize, they were trying to make them seem like an other. And that is something that can be related quite simply to what's going on in our world today. Now, similarly, authority at the time tended to try to shift perception on how information should be shared as well. This is an example of how, when you trust the authority, in this case the government, they try to teach people how to act and how not to share information with each other. And I think this is kind of related to what might be a little bit happening in some cases today as well. Here, they're suggesting that, don't talk to your neighbors too much. Don't say too much about what's going on in the war. Don't talk about what's going on with your husband who's off in the war and the letters and things that you've been getting, because that could be very dangerous. Similarly, here they're trying to show that while we make posters and everything that's trying to educate people as well, our enemies also do those things. Be careful. You need to be a critical reader when it comes to what your enemies are suggesting, but you need to believe us. And then I thought this one was a particularly salient image because, of course, it involves a woman, and there was quite a few that involved women as well. One I didn't share because I thought it was maybe a little bit harsh, but it said basically, if you're in the army or you're in the Navy or wherever you're fighting for us, don't hire prostitutes because they're spies and they're going to get information to the enemy. And in this case, here we're showing that yes, there's a very nice-looking woman. She just looks like everybody else, but she shared information with the wrong person, and you shouldn't do that yourself. Now I'll jump a little bit ahead, but I just wanted to mention these two books as well, because these two books are things that are coming in the news and being related to what's happening these days as well. And I'm sure many of us have read these two books. These are the first editions that I could find. So we have Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, and we have 1984 by George Orwell. And these were published a long time ago, but there are parallels that are being made between the type of control the government is having over what we read and the information that we're exposed to, and trying to teach us, in fact, what type of information to believe and what not to believe. And very similarly in these two books, this happened as well. So let's move on a little bit away from history, and we're going to talk more, why is it that we tend to fall for these things? What is it about the propaganda? What is it about the alternative facts? What is it about the news that makes us susceptible as a culture to not reading so critically and believing what's out there? So I'm going to talk about three factors in particular. One is plausibility. And what I mean by plausibility here is that there is something about that just makes it easy to believe. Right? There's something about the way that it is written, maybe who it was written by, maybe the type of content that's in it, that makes us just not really want to question it very much. And I'm going to show an example of that in a second. The second factor we need to consider is authority. And related to authority is this idea of cognitive simplicity. And it's pretty much related, actually. It's interchangeable a little bit with plausibility. This comes from Shermer in 2002. And what he's suggesting is that what is ever the easiest to believe is what we will try to believe. Right? We don't want to put, as a race, too much effort into thinking too critically as to what is out there. So if something seems like it's possible, if something doesn't really conflict with our belief system very much, then we tend to just overlook little inaccuracies about it, and we tend to just believe it. The third component that makes us susceptible to these things are really our beliefs, the things that we believe about our world, our nature, and who we are. And two related aspects to that is cognitive dissonance. This also comes from Schirmer. And cognitive dissonance, you might have heard sort of as confirmation bias in some other texts. Basically, when something disagrees with our beliefs, we feel uncomfortable with it, right? So we have a little bit of a challenge to accept an evidence that's out there if it conflicts with what we already believe. And related to that, and maybe a little bit more serious or severe, is this thing called the backfire effect. And the backfire effect was a term that was coined by Nyan and Reifler. And I'm going to show a quick cartoon a little bit later about this backfire effect. But the basic idea, which you'll get to notice, is that when something conflicts with our beliefs too seriously, we actually fight back against the truth. We have a sort of visceral, emotional response, a physical response to this conflict. And it causes us to sort of put up a wall where we don't want to actually accept new evidence and things that conflict with how we already believe. And it's a really interesting phenomenon, really, because we often think, I think as teachers, or just educated people in general, how can you believe something when there's overwhelming evidence to suggest that it's not true? And when we're critical thinkers, when we're educators, when we're teachers about these things, we think, okay, it just makes sense. I'm just going to take the research and I'm going to believe what the research says. And if it doesn't agree with what I'm thinking, then, c'est la vie. I'm going to try to change what I'm thinking about it. But I think even as you go further into academia, as a researcher myself, I struggle with this too. When you go into a research project, you have sort of a background belief of what it is that you're trying to research. You have this idea, you have this theory about what it is that's causing your students to do this or causing them to do that. In my case, like I said, I have this book called Academic Reading Circles, and my whole point was trying to get a way to get students to dig more deeply into the texts that they're reading so that they can understand it better. Now, if I do a research project where I'm trying to figure out whether or not my activity that I have created, that I've spent so much time on, my baby, as it were, if I theorize that I want to find out how much, in fact, do the academic reading circles improve learner comprehension and engagement in those texts. And I go into it as a researcher a little bit with a bias suggesting, okay, well, my anecdotal evidence suggests that it's great. It works out quite well. And then I do my mechanics, I create my research project, and then I have to look at that data for what it is. I have to look and see what does that data actually say, and try to release myself from being precious about my baby here, and really see, in fact, if that evidence confirms what I believe or what I don't believe. And I think this is where the backfire effect sort of comes into play. When you're a researcher, you get trained, you get sort of expecting that these types of things won't match necessarily, and you just have to read that data. But as regular people, including our learners, it can be very challenging to just let go of something that you have believed so strongly for quite some time. And I think that is really something, if you think about your own beliefs, think of one that was really strong. If you have a particular belief and there is evidence to suggest that that belief is no longer true, but you believed it your entire life, how willing are you to let that go? And I think as a critical reader, as a critical thinker, or as someone who thinks critically, we have to really be aware of these things and try to drop our biases in this respect. So what I'm going to do is show you a couple of examples of where these three, well, I guess 5 things play out. And finally, when we get to the end, I'll show you some practical things that we can show in the classroom. So, back to the image that we started with. This is the guy who was in the image in Snow White. Does anybody know who he is? No? I think maybe we're all too old. Really? Myself included, so don't feel bad. This guy is actually Jack. And Jack comes from Treasure Planet, which actually is a playoff of Treasure Island. So you may not have seen this Disney movie because it's a little more recent and it's not called Treasure Island, but maybe your kids have seen it. In any case, what I want to show you here is I want you to think about what does Snow White look like? What does the cartoon or the animation of Snow White look like? What colors are involved in the animation of Snow White? What time period is Snow White set in? What kind of clothes does she wear? If you think about these things and then you look at this image of Jack, you might start to recognize that, oh, you know, it's kind of plausible that Jack might appear in Snow White. Why? Because there's characteristics about this animation that actually fit quite well with the characteristics of Snow White too. You know, he's sort of got the, I don't know what time period necessarily, but he's got the right sort of colors going on that Snow White did as well. He's sort of got the style of what Snow White kind of looked like. And so when we saw him in the Snow White picture at the beginning, the immediate thing that we would probably think is just to kind of overlook it, right? If we don't look at that image very carefully, we think it's plausible that he might actually be sleeping in that bed, because he does kind of look like he's supposed to be there. But when you think a little bit more critically about it, you start to make questions in your mind about, oh, well, I don't remember there being a grown man in Snow White's bed. But when a set of claims matches our perceptions of what they already are, as I said, we tend to overlook these little inaccuracies without being very critical about it. And as I said, this image from Treasure Planet matched with Snow White's background, and without any further investigation, we kind of just blindly accept that he's supposed to be there. And this is very replicant of what happens when we look at some news articles as well. When we think that something is plausible, when it kind of matches, even if there are tiny little inaccuracies, our mind, as I said, tries to find the simplest explanation and really just skip over those inaccuracies. And those are the types of things we as teachers need to be aware of and try to help our learners to see as well.